let's start. Hi, everyone. Kurt AG here, Corpus Informed Research and Teaching Interest Group with CATESOL. And today we have our guest, Larissa Goulart. She works at Montclair State University. She's an assistant professor, I believe, right?
Yes.
Larissa. We met back in Northern Arizona University, which is located in Flagstaff, Arizona. We both were in programs, but I was in master's. She was doing PhD, and now she lives by the Montclair State University. And here she's going to be introducing Corpora for language teaching today. I hope you enjoyed. Please, if you have any questions, leave them in the chat. Feel free to ask them at the end of the session, and we are really happy to have you today. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to you, Larissa.
Thank you, Ellie, for inviting me to give this talk. Thanks, everyone, for being here. I know you just had your big KTESOL conference, so you're probably like tired of hearing people talk at this point. So I'm really happy to see all of you here today. And just want to say that this talk is going to be a bit interactive. So I might ask you some questions. Feel free to unmute yourself or to post your answers in the chat. Also, I'll share a lot of different resources. So at some point you might feel like a bit overwhelmed with all the websites I'm talking about. But at the end of the talk, I'll have a Padlet with all the links that I'm mentioning, okay, so that you know where I'm going. So as Ellie mentioned, I'm a professor here at Montclair State University. I teach the undergrad in linguistics and the master's in applied linguistics and computational linguistics. And for this talk, I'm going to draw a lot of my experience, my previous experience as a teacher of writing, and also like my research on corpus for language teaching and for language learning. You can find more resources of like what I'm talking about in my lab website, which is also here in this first slide, like the corpus-lab.com. So let's start from the beginning. You might see me like shifting stuff. It's just that I want to see your faces. Like I want to see the Zoom faces. So I'm going to be moving a little bit here on the slides. So let's say you have a student who writes in his or their essay something like this. In this article, Pring Mill highlights the tasty irony of the book's ending. So you might think, well, tasty irony, it's not really the combination of words we usually see, right? So one thing that you could do, one way that you could give feedback to the student is do something like this, just like highlight in any color and say it's not tasty, it's delicious. Now, another thing that it's a possibility that you could do is to show the students data, like language data, and show them the options of how language is used in real life. So here I have delicious and the words that usually occur after delicious. So I have delicious food occurs 278 times. Delicious meal occurs 163 times. And we can see that delicious irony occurs 59 times. Same thing now, I can do the same with tasty and see like tasty food, tasty treats, tasty meal, tasty recipes, but there is no irony here. So we can highlight, in this case, I'm highlighting to the student that tasty usually occurs with foods, but it doesn't occur with irony, while delicious occurs with food and irony. This way, the student can either choose to do delicious, right, to use delicious, which is the most common use in the language, or maybe for some stylistic effect, you know, maybe they want to cause an impact in the reader, they want to keep tasty irony, but at least this way they're making an informed decision based on language data. Now, I have another example here to illustrate the same thing. So for example, here is like Ginther, 1995, quoted that if a child's behavior are construed as being negative, it is unlikely that the child will be seen as gifted. So one way that as a teacher I could give feedback is to say this is the wrong verb, it doesn't really express the meaning that you intend. Now another thing that I can do is to show the students some language data, which would be to search, for example, for parentheses, any verb followed by that clause. So in that case, we can see that the most frequent ones are like found that, suggested that, stated that, showed that, argued that, and so on. So you can see here lots of examples that the student then could choose out of those verbs, which one is the most appropriate. So again, I'm giving information and the student's making a decision here. So these are examples of the use of corpus in the classroom. So what is like corpus in the classroom? Corpus in the classroom can be used to like highlight issues in students' own work, suggest alternative language, and illustrate typical uses of language. So rather than giving out rules, I'm just illustrating what is more typical and what most people do. So in this talk here, my goal is to convince you to join the corpus revolution. And I always say this whenever I talk to teachers, I have this exact slide saying, I want to convince you to join the corpus revolution. I want to try and convince you to try at least one corpus-based activity in your classroom. So let's start from the beginning. What is a corpus? So some definitions will say that a corpus is a large principal collection of natural texts. Now, what does like a principal collection mean? It means that you have some specific criteria. So let's say if I want to collect a corpus of the Chronicles of Narnia, in order to analyze the language. Maybe I'm teaching a class on creative writing where students have to write a fan fiction, of the Chronicles of Narnia. So I'm going to get examples only from the Chronicles of Narnia. It means that if I'm lacking, let's say I want to find examples of passive voice and I cannot find here, I'm not going to go and add more text from the Lord of the Rings, for example, because that's not a principal collection. I'm not like representing what I say I'm representing. So dealing with this, a corpus is representative of a specific discourse variety. So this could be young adult literature. It could be, for example, just the Chronicles of Narnia. It could be Jane Austen, as it could be like novels. Here I'm drawing a lot of like literature examples, but it could be student writing, newspaper articles, different things, as long as you represent the domain you say you are representing. Now, going back to my example from the Chronicles of Narnia, the corpus has to be stored on a computer. So if I have all the Chronicles of Narnia books here in my bookshelf, it doesn't mean that I have a corpus. Because in order for it to be a corpus, I have to be able to run some computer programs to conduct qualitative and quantitative analysis. Okay, so this is what I hope we all understand, like corpus as the same thing moving forward in this talk. You might be familiar. I saw that like you already had some corpus talks before in the corpus corner. So you might be familiar with different corpora, such as the Corpus of Contemporary American English, BOWY, the British Academic Written English Corpus, the BNC, the British National Corpus, MyCase, the Michigan Corpus of Academic Spoken English, or here's a list of all of them. You might have seen them like in different examples from them in different textbooks, in different like papers at like TESOL Quarterly and other journals geared toward teachers. You might have seen examples from this corpora. I will be talking about some of them today and also giving examples from other tools that were developed specifically for teachers. And this is where the Padlet that I mentioned before will be helpful later. Okay, so all the links will be on that Padlet. It's important for us to understand that there are different types of corpora. So a corpus can be a collection of spoken, written text, or both. Some examples of spoken corpora are, for example, the British Academic Spoken English Corpus. This is a corpus of lectures in British universities. There is also the corpus of American soap operas. Maybe you want to, teach like popular language. There is a corpus of just like Friends, the show, movie scripts. There is a corpus just of like American lectures at universities if you're teaching EAP. Now for written corpora, we have lots of different options. Here I have a couple of examples. There is a corpus that's a collection of all of Wikipedia. This is called the Wikipedia corpus. We also have the Michigan Corpus of Upper Level Student Papers. This is a corpus of like texts that students wrote for Michigan University. I think I saw a talk by Shelley Staples too. So she also has CROW, the Corpus and Repository of Writing. I saw a talk by Shelley Staples here on the KTESO YouTube channel. So that's the Corpus of Repository of Writing, which also has lots of texts from students at the University of Arizona, NAU, and Purdue University. So these are all written corpora. And there's also corpora that contain both, like Corpus of Contemporary American English has both speech, blogs, TV, and written stuff, like, for example, academic writing, newspaper articles, and things like that. The British National Corpus, or the BNC, also combines different things here. Okay, so what are the source of this text? Some corpora can vary, like they can be specific, like face-to-face conversation, like you had the presentation about the Lana corpus, which is face-to-face conversation. It could be planned speeches, things that like you write to give a speech. It could be a corpus of academic writing, fiction, or media discourse. General corpora like Coke and the BNC try to represent the whole language. Specialized corpora try to represent specific areas of the language. This is useful if you're teaching English for specific purposes, for example, because you don't want to teach students about the general language. You want to teach students specifically about, like the language of nursing or the language of, I'm trying to think of like business, something specific, right? Now, what can we do with corpora? So far, I tried to like give a brief overview of what corpus is, the different type of corpora we have. Now, what can we do with it? Well, the first answer is linguistics research. The reason why corpora was developed, like this idea came about in probably like the 60s, was to do linguistics research. So I want you to try a bit of linguistics research. A lot of what we do with corpora is trying to we have our intuition and then we try to test it in real language data. So based on your own experience, what do you think are the most frequent verbs of academic writing? You can post it in the chat or you can unmute yourself. I want some guesses, people.
Would these be the most frequent that were not in spoken English or just?
Most frequent in academic. It could be in spoken.
Okay, it could be in both.
Yeah, it could be both. So Liz mentioned reporting verbs. Ella mentioned like process. Anybody else wants to is? So like verb to be, perhaps. Ida mentioned navigate. Are you ready? Cause. What are my drum rolls? Feedback. Very specific, Ellie. So drum rolls. This is my drum rolls. The most frequent verbs in academic English are use, make, see, provide, find, and take. So you can see here, what do you see here are like first the ranking, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 4. Use, make, these are like the forms of the verb. Then you see overall how many times it occurs. This is what you have in this dark blue column. And then you have like 1990 to 94. It's how frequent they were across these years, specifically like 1995 to 99, 2000, 2004, 2005, 2009, and so on. So you can see the frequency of these verbs vary depending on the year. This is academic writing, like published research articles. Now, do you think it varies by discipline? Do you think that like use is more frequent in a given discipline than another? Ellie says yes. Let me see what the chat says. The chat says yes. Okay, now you are in tune because yes. So here what you can see is the frequency, and then you have different disciplines, right? You have history, education, geology and social sciences, geography and social sciences, law and political sciences, humanities, philosophy and religion, science/technology, medicine, miscellaneous, and business. So the length of my chart here indicates in which one it is more frequent. So you can see that like it's most frequent in science, it is really frequent in education or in medicine, while it's not that used in law and political science, for example, it's not that used in history. So you just did your first corpus linguistics research. You have a corpus linguistics study already. We did something. And then based on this, you probably, as teachers, you're thinking like, well, this could be useful for me to teach academic writing, right? Initially, people doing corpus linguistics, they were just interested in describing the language, not necessarily with this goal of applying this to teaching. But as teachers came to know about this, they were like, well, this could be useful for language teaching. And this has spread out. So here's an example of a task that I use with my students when I'm teaching advanced structures of American English to the master students. So in this exercise, I want them to understand the difference between using apostrophe S versus of in different like language examples. So I have here what we call concordance lines. This means that I search for the use of apostrophe S to indicate possession and of, and what I'm asking them is to try and like figure it out. What is the rule? So this is an example of using corpus in language teaching. So I hope that when they read these examples, they will understand that we usually use the apostrophe S to indicate ownership when the owner is an animate noun. So we have like attackers, Augusta, author, authority, Banians. So it's all like a person. While of, it's usually an inanimate noun, like auditorium, availability, back of, balance of, ballroom of, birds of, cabinet makers of. So this is how I'm using corpus in my teaching practice. This idea of using corpus into teaching is called data-driven learning. And this name, data-driven learning, came about by Tim Jones in 1991. And the idea is that data-driven learning is this educational approach where decisions about the learning process are based on data analysis rather than intuitions. So in this context specifically, data typically refers to information collected from various sources, usually meaning corpora of the target language. So we're giving students data about the language and we're asking them to infer meaning from them. And why should we be including data-driven learning in language teaching, you might be wondering. So first, I'm going to give you a quantitative example here, or a quantitative argument. So in this meta-analysis by Bolton and Cobb, they examined 64 studies on like applications of data-driven learning, and they found like a positive uptake. So on the 64 studies, they found out that the group of students that were using DDL learned like more language in a pre-test, post-test design than the group of students that were not doing DDL in their classroom. So research has shown that it improves students' language gain. But if you're not really into like quantitative arguments, I'm going to give you some more like qualitative arguments here. So I think one of the benefits that really drew me into corpus was this idea that it presents authentic data. A lot of the examples we see in language textbooks, for example, are like construed by the author, or things like made up by somebody. It's not really how language occurs in real life. And I think like for me, this was really important to give examples related to like what you're actually going to see in real life. This relates to the idea that there's like an abundance of examples of real patterns. So if I search for examples of passive voice on Coca, I'll get like plenty of examples, and it's way harder to find it on like one text if I'm trying to do that. It helps learners identify language patterns rather than rules. So this goes into my example of tasty irony versus delicious irony. I feel like teachers sometimes, especially teachers of writing, don't want to constrain students and limit their creativity. This is one way to say like the typical use is delicious irony. But if you, for, like to cause some effect on the reader, want to use tasty irony, then like you're not doing it because it's a mistake or an error, but rather because you want to cause something with that use. It also helps learners understand conventions of specific discourse communities. So we know that, for example, if you're teaching EAP and ESP, there are specific like language that is used in like a discourse community. Let's say you're teaching like English for business. There's specific terms that are used in like business language that you can get from like using only a corpus of business language to teach those students. It draws on exploratory learning, like the students are at the center of their own learning experience. It develops students' autonomy as language learners. So for example, if I teach students how to use corpus and language data, maybe when they have a question later on after they finish my class, or after like when they are already doing their class in their discipline, they will be able to answer their question themselves without having to, ask a teacher, without having to go to somebody like, oh, let me ask a native speaker. Like a native speaker is not always available. It doesn't mean that they are like the holy grail of language. So you become like better at answering your own questions based on data. And it connects research to ESL teaching. Like it can help inform the selection of lexical-grammatical features, inform the appropriateness of language use in relation to register, for example. Now, there are some challenges of implementing the DL in the classroom, especially from the perspective of the language teacher. Lots of studies have been done on this, and I'll highlight the 3 challenges that they mentioned because these are the 3 challenges I want to address with you. The first one that they mentioned is that teachers don't usually have corpus training. And I mean, you all are here, so you do have some corpus training, but a lot of like the undergrads or the grad programs that prepare English teachers, they don't have a course or even a module dedicated to corpus linguistics. So it's hard for teachers to for me to say, oh yeah, you should join the revolution. You should join, the corpus linguistics revolution, when actually you don't have any training on that. The other thing is that teachers usually think that once they learn about corpus, they'll think, well, but I need to compile my own corpus. So they don't know about the availability of some corpus tools that were created specifically for teachers. And the last one is that in order to create some corpus-based materials, you need to develop first some corpus research, like some small projects, and then you're going to translate that into classroom materials. So this makes corpus analysis a bit complex and time-consuming task. I'm going to try to address these 3 challenges today so that when you're out of here, you can think okay, I can implement one task in my class. So let's start with teachers don't have corpus training. We're gonna do this as a vocabulary lesson. I'm gonna teach you a lot of terms related to corpus. So this is corpus 101, corpus terminology for the basics. We already know what a corpus is. I just want to highlight that a corpus is not a website. So the Corpus of Contemporary American English is just a website that hosts the corpus, but the website, it's not the corpus. Because a corpus can be a collection of any text. So let's say I like Taylor Swift. I can go to Genius, copy all the lyrics, store it on a TXT, and then download the program that will help me to analyze it. Or let's say you have your own students' texts. You can make that into a corpus and download the program that will help you analyze it. So a corpus doesn't have to be on a website. A concordancer is this tool that you can use to analyze a corpus. This can actually be online. So this would be COCA, Scale, Netspeak, or it could be an offline program that, again, you install on your computer and you use to analyze language. Now, search term or keyword is how I'm going to refer to the word or phrase that you are searching, that you're interested in. So let's say I'm interested in a passive voice. The search term that I will have will be verb to be plus a verb with ed, right? That will give me the dog was walked, for example. That's a horrible example, but you got the idea. The 4 different corpus tools or corpus functionalities I'll talk about are concordance lines, keyword in context, collocations, and word lists. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to give you a brief definition of what it is, and then I'm going to show you how this could be applied in your classroom, okay, in a task. So it's going to be this is a concordance line. This is how this could be used for teaching. So concordance lines are something that is actually very old. Even in old monasteries, medieval monks created concordances of the Bible with each word, including the article, the, a, and on little flashcards, you can think of it, shown in its context, so that they could go back and examine language. So they would spend days transcribing the Bible, sentence by sentence, but centralizing one word so that they could have a reference later to study, the language of the Bible. Nowadays, we don't do this. Corpus linguists don't write down every use of a word. Imagine me with all my undergraduate assistants and they're writing all the words. I think they would hate me. But we use corpus tools or computer tools to find all the instances of a word in a given corpus. You can think of this as doing Control F on a Word document, for example. This is what we call concordance lines. So a concordance line looks like this. This is a concordance line on COCA, where I search for the phrase English teaching, and it will give me all the different examples of the phrase English teaching occur in this corpus. So it give me lots of sentences where this phrase is used. In COCA, the way that I get to this, so this is the front page of COCA, I would just type in the first search button that I see, I would just type English teaching, press find matching string, and then it would give me this result. It would show me that like this appears 61 times in the corpus. And then once I click this like English teaching, it will give me all the examples of English teaching. So I just want to like pause here and say that like one obvious use for this would be, for example, if I'm trying to create a gap exercise with a specific word, I could just search here and create this gap exercise with real sentences. I do that a lot. But how can I create materials using concordance line, right? I'll give you one idea of one task. So let's say I have a student that has this question about like, how do we use nonetheless in a sentence? And here I have some examples of like this student writing and where they are using nonetheless. So you can see like the problem nonetheless lies with the radical solution. Coping mechanisms nonetheless, both theory and research suggest that blah, blah, blah. And known for his writing, Brodel was nonetheless a builder. You can see that there are like some problems with the use of nonetheless in the sentences. But I don't just want to like go, correcting everything in my students' writing. I want them to like develop the skills to correct and edit their own texts. So the way that I could do this is like ask the students to take a look at the concordance lines for nonetheless. So this is what you have here. And like say, how is nonetheless used in the sentences? So I have these like guiding questions. Where in the sentence does nonetheless appear? And what type of punctuation occurs to the right and to the left of nonetheless? My goal here will be for students to notice that in academic writing, nonetheless usually occurs in the beginning of a sentence followed by a comma, because so far in their own writing, they are using nonetheless without really using the proper punctuation around it. So you can see this is an example of how I could use concordance lines in my teaching. As I mentioned before, like the goal of this activity is for students to notice how like linking adverbials can be used in a sentence. And this activity can also help students edit their own text. I can also like replicate this with different linking adverbials so that they notice where they go like for each of them. Like I could do the same thing with like furthermore, with nevertheless, and so on, so that they can contrast the patterns. Okay, so we learned about concordance lines. The next step is to learn about keyword in context. So a keyword in context, it's similar to a concordance line. The difference is that it displays your search term in the center of your concordance line, and it aligns the subsequent terms alphabetically. So you can see here I search for jump, and you can see that to the right, like the word that occurs after it, are organized alphabetically. All of them are like jump in, jump in. The way that I get to this is if I go to COCA, again, this is the front page, this first picture here. I will click KWIC, like KYIC, search for the word I'm interested in, and I can choose to either align to the left or to the right. So they can be organized alphabetically to the left and to the right. And I can search that by clicking left or right. You can see the L and the R here. And then it will give me this results here that you see, that is the one that I showed before, where jump is aligned to the center. So this is helpful, again, if I'm trying to find patterns of like what occurs after a word. How can this be used in my teaching materials? Let's say I have a student who has this question. Which prepositions should I use when comparing two things? Should I say there are many differences between essays and literature reviews, or should I say there are many differences from essays and literature reviews? For us, the answer might be obvious, right? Like we could quickly answer this question. But we don't want to just give the answer to the student. We want to teach them how to fish too. So this is what we're doing with Corpus. So I can use the KWIC function on COCA and search for the word differences. And this is the results going to give me. So you can see that between appears way more frequently here on my video. I'm scrolling down the answer. You can see from, I can play this again. Can see from appears like maybe 2 or 3 times, but the most frequent one is definitely between. So here I'm giving the student this idea of like the quantity, right, of like the many times that this preposition is used by looking at data. And the student can also use the like 4 examples they have from to try and understand when would differences from be appropriate or not. So we already learned 2 terms. I have 2 more terms. Collocations. So collocations means, or like collocates, means located together. These are two or more words that occur more frequently together than would be expected by chance. So here I'm going to test your knowledge again. These are the collocates to a word. This is like black and then a word, hot and then a word, instant and then a word. And this is all the same word, okay? Which word comes right after these 9 words? Do you know? You can post in the chat or you can unmute.
How about black, white? Black and white.
But then like hot white, instant white, good white. That's not it.
Is it coffee?
All of them collocate with the same.
Coffee, like black coffee, hot coffee.
Yes, it's coffee. So black coffee, hot coffee, instant coffee, good coffee, iced coffee, local coffee, free coffee, strong coffee, and fresh coffee. Yeah, so this is all coffee. Okay, another test for you, okay? Which word collocates with this ones? So it's definitely not iced coffee, green coffee, something related. Tea, yes, Liz mentioned tea. Oops, I clicked too much. So we have here the collocates for coffee and for tea. So you can see how this works. So collocates tells us a lot about what a word means. So for example, advanced speakers of English know to use strong rather than describe coffee as like robust or powerful. But it can also show us like the word, how the meaning of a word changes through time. So for example, the word gay meant something different in the 50s than what it means nowadays. So here I have collocates of gay. Which of these do you think are the 50s and which of these do you think are like 2020s?